Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about a very, very contentious issue, but in my channel I try not to censor anything or be politically correct about anything. I try to be candid in my views, and I try not to let any issue be off the table. So for that reason I want to talk about this one. The issue is the subject of rape. Rape is a heinous crime because it is the worst violation imaginable of its victim. Forcing someone to have sexual intercourse, forcing yourself onto them, doesn't only cause immediate physical problems, it causes years of psychological problems as well. Fear, anxiety, all sorts of things. This is based on what I've seen from rape victims, their testimonies and so on. So let's be under no illusion, rape is a heinous crime. That is the first thing I want to make absolutely crystal clear. However, it does seem that whenever this issue is brought up, it's always in a contentious sort of way. It seems that it's very, very difficult to talk about the subject without controversy, because one of the absolutely key questions is how rape is defined. Now, I think the most reasonable explanation is forced sex, i.e. without consent. That is rape. But we have a situation whereby there is clearly double standards in application of what constitutes a rapist and a rape victim. Now, there are some clear-cut cases. If a woman, I'm saying a woman as an example, I know men can be raped as well, but if a woman is attacked in the back alley, forced against a wall, and a rapist forces penetration onto her, that is rape. It's clear-cut. And no one except the most cold-hearted moron would deny that. Rape is absolutely used in war zones, although I'm trying to be a bit more specific here to the United Kingdom. Rape happens, and I think one of the biggest problems with the men's rights movement is they would actually go so far as to deny that it happens, or I have seen extreme MRAs try to deny that it even happens. But that is disgraceful, because it's insulting the victims, but it also lets down those women and men who need help. I think people who are guilty of this crime should get very harsh punishment. That goes without question. But it seems that when people excuse me. Hello? Yeah? Okay, I might check it out soon, thanks. I'm just making a video, I'll check it out. Sorry about that, I'll just continue with the video though. Okay, so this is a subject that is very contentious. I found one of the main grey areas, and I know there will be those who say there are no grey areas. How can you... You know, this is the problem. There is absolutely no free expression in this debate whatsoever. You cannot bring things up without being accused of trivialising rape. Now, I've tried to make that clear at the start of the video that I acknowledge rape is an awful crime. But there are grey areas. There are. And we shouldn't be afraid to say that there are. Scenario. A man and woman are at a nightclub. They're both drinking. They both get very drunk, right? Young man and young woman, doesn't really matter. But let's say they're both drinking, they both get drunk. Now, they go home in that state of mind when they're not entirely familiar with the circumstances. You know what it's like being drunk. You're not entirely in control of your own actions. Anyway, they go home and they have sex. Now, let's say for the sake of argument that the woman feels uncomfortable the next day. She feels that that's something that shouldn't have happened. And she thinks, oh well, I can't really remember. Maybe I was raped because I was at this guy's house, but I can't remember if we had sex or not. She's feeling terrible because she's hungover. She can't remember what's happened. Now, let's say for the sake of argument, she turns around and says that's rape. But how would the legal system treat that? They would see her as being almost childlike, vulnerable, because she's a drunk woman, but he's seen as a responsible adult, even if he is also drunk. And that's something I think that is grossly unfair. There is absolutely double standards applied to this. Now, clearly it is different in situations where the rapist is a very scheming individual who deliberately plies their victim with alcohol, and he himself stays relatively sober. That's completely different because he is in control of his actions, and any responsible, decent man wouldn't make moves on a severely drunk woman. But I do think there's a mitigating factor if the man is equally drunk, because it's the notion that he has to be a responsible adult but she doesn't. I think that's the worst sort of double standards. I also take issue with the idea that she can allege rape when she can't remember. That just seems, sending someone to jail for up to a decade on evidence that isn't remembered, that really seems flimsy at best. So I do think it is extremely important that these subjects are discussed, but in part because the feminist movement has shouted down any sort of views on this subject, because they say, oh, if you bring these things up, you're trivializing it. No, actually, it's not trivializing it, it's trying to clarify what we define, how we define it. I think that's entirely reasonable. Not only reasonable, I think it's necessary, because the consequences are twofold. Either a man gets sent to jail for years for a crime he potentially didn't commit, and there has been cases of that happening, or the woman doesn't get justice. Because you need clarification on this subject, and that's the problem. Right now, defining rape is not clarified in the legal system. It really isn't. Not enough, anyway. In my opinion, if two people are drunk, she can't turn around and cry rape, because it's equal responsibility. And I'm not saying that's different if she's been plied with alcohol. That's completely different. But I'm talking about two responsible adults who are in exactly the same situation. Why the hell should he be punished and she's the victim? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. And I don't think it is extreme to make that point, and I don't think it should be controversial. Of course it's important that politicians treat this issue with sensitivity, because it's a heinous crime, but like I say, it is important to just define it. And I don't think that's controversial. Any other crime you have to define clearly, so why should this be any different? Another thing is that the argument about anonymity in rape cases for the victim but not for the accused, I think that is an utter abomination. I think both parties should be anonymous until the verdict, because even if the man is cleared, his name is staying forever. And this also applies to child abuse cases. Look at Cliff Richard. He was cleared of all charges, and yet the BBC had maximum coverage of that. It was disgraceful. Now, if that had been professional, they wouldn't have named which celebrity was involved. Of course, then there's the other problem, because people turn around and say, well, if we don't name suspects, then you get this guessing game, and then innocent people might be accused. That's also a risk. But they could make it as vague as possible. They could say something like, a 71-year-old man has been charged. That's it. And if people get into vigilantism or naming people, that should be a criminal offence in itself, in my opinion, for slandering people without evidence. But it seems grossly unfair that a rape defendant is named and his victims remain anonymous, his potential victims. Now, this is not to say that it doesn't happen. Of course, probably most rape cases are sincere, and we do have a big problem with far too many women don't get the justice they deserve. That is a big problem. But by the same token, there is also men who get falsely accused, and the false accusers do not get the same sort of sentence that, in my opinion, they deserve. If you falsely accuse an innocent person of a crime as heinous as that, as far as I'm concerned, you should go to jail for years for destroying someone's life. So all I'm saying is it is very important that this issue is clarified. Rape is forced sexual intercourse on someone who has clearly said no. To me, that is what rape is. Or sex with an underage minor, that's also, I would class that as rape. But in circumstances, for example, both parties are drunk, I really have difficulty with the idea that someone could go to jail for years on that sort of evidence, so-called evidence. There are other situations, and again this will be a controversial point, but there are some women, a minority of women, who will make mistakes. For example, they'll cheat on a boyfriend, and in order to cover it up, they'll say they were raped. That's a controversial statement, but it happens. So, just to be clear again, I believe rape is a heinous crime. I believe rapists should be punished, and I believe women should, and men for that matter, in fact especially men, because it's harder for them to come forward, people who have been victims of this crime should get full support. But there has to be a clear definition of how we define this, and if both parties are drunk, I just don't know how you could call that rape. To me, that's odious. It's odious because someone is going to go to jail for years on that sort of evidence. It's crazy. So I have no time for MRAs who go so far as to say this problem doesn't exist, because it really does. But at the same time, the other extreme is shouting down anyone who even has a view on the subject, or who tries to contribute to debating how we define this. Especially if a male politician was to say something. I believe a few years ago Ken Clark said something about there's different kinds of rape, and it was badly worded, but I think I know what he was getting at. What he was trying to get at is areas where there are grey question marks, like this. But of course he was completely shouted down. Oh, he's trivialising rape. Oh, he thinks it's a small thing, etc, etc, etc. It's very, very hard to talk about this issue. And how can you have legislation on a serious crime when people can't even freely talk about it? To me, that's crazy. There needs to be open debate on about this without people being shouted down just for having an opinion. Now clearly if someone comes out and says, oh, there's nothing wrong with rape, that's appalling. But when someone is simply trying to say, we're trying to define what this is, that is important for everyone actually. It's important for the victims, it's important for justice, and it's important for bringing the rapists to justice. It's also important for making sure that innocent men are not accused of something that they haven't done. All of these things are important.